Mark and Emily Wheeler seemed to have it all. Their wedding had been a picture-perfect event, complete with heartfelt vows, a grand reception, and a send-off filled with laughter and well wishes. Emily, a 28-year-old elementary school teacher with a love for travel, had been swept off her feet by Mark, a charismatic marketing executive in his early 30s. Their romance, which began just over a year ago, had moved quickly, fueled by a passion that made their love seem invincible. Emily's friends and family adored her. She was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered, always full of warmth and positivity. Mark, on the other hand, was seen as a devoted partner who had brought new excitement into Emily's life. Together, they shared an image of a couple destined for happiness. So when they announced their plans for a honeymoon in Hawaii, no one was surprised. It was the perfect destination for two people deeply in love and ready to embark on the next chapter of their lives. As the plane touched down in Maui, Emily was practically glowing. The island's lush greenery, turquoise waters, and soft sandy beaches were exactly as she had imagined. Mark, always attentive, had spared no expense, booking them a suite at one of the island's most luxurious beachfront resorts. From the moment they arrived, they appeared to be the epitome of a couple enjoying marital bliss. Social media posts captured moments of joy, Emily sipping a cocktail adorned with a tropical flower, Mark posing beside her with the sunset as a backdrop. Friends commented with words like goals and dream honeymoon. Their followers saw only the highlights, a curated narrative of perfection. But behind the carefully selected images, there were signs of strain that only the most perceptive might have noticed. Emily's smile sometimes faltered, her gaze momentarily distant in candid photos. There was an underlying tension in her posture when she stood beside Mark, a subtle unease that contrasted with the picturesque setting. Emily's excitement about the trip had been overshadowed by a nagging worry even before they boarded the plane. Over the past few months, Mark had become more controlling. He criticized her choices, monitored her social interactions, and occasionally displayed flashes of anger that left her shaken. These moments were fleeting, often followed by apologies and gestures of affection that reassured her at least temporarily. During the first few days on the island, Emily tried to immerse herself in the experience, soaking up the beauty around her. She explored the resort, walked along the beach at sunrise, and spent hours journaling her thoughts. Yet she couldn't entirely shake a feeling of unease. Mark, meanwhile, oscillated between charming and distant. His mood seemed unpredictable, his affection laced with an intensity that bordered on possessiveness. One evening, as they dined at an elegant seaside restaurant, Emily noticed Mark's irritation when she exchanged pleasantries with a waiter. His smile for the camera was perfect, but his hand gripped hers a little too tightly under the table. It was a small moment, almost insignificant, but it left her unsettled. Emily began to wonder if she had ignored warning signs before their wedding. Her doubts, however, were drowned out by her desire to make the marriage work. She loved Mark and believed in the vows they had exchanged. This was their honeymoon, a time for joy and connection, not suspicion. As the days unfolded, Emily clung to hope, determined to salvage the trip and her new life as a wife. What she didn't know was that the paradise she had dreamed of would soon turn into a nightmare. The idyllic facade of Mark and Emily's honeymoon began to crumble within days of their arrival in Maui. To the untrained eye, they still appeared to be a happy couple enjoying the perfect tropical escape. They attended a traditional loo, walked along the pristine beach, and even ventured out for a snorkeling excursion. Yet, behind the sunny photos and cheerful moments, a darker story was unfolding. Emily had always been vibrant and social, her laughter infectious and her spirit unshakable. But those who interacted with her during the honeymoon noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor. The once confident woman now seemed reserved, her smiles more subdued, her energy dimmed. Staff members at the resort noted her tendency to stay near the edges of the pool, quietly reading or journaling while Mark wandered off on his own. Her solitude was striking, given that this was supposed to be a celebration of their new life together. The cracks in their relationship became harder to hide. One night, A couple staying in the room next to theirs overheard raised voices through the thin walls. Although the words were indistinct, the tone was unmistakable, tense, angry, and charged with frustration. The argument ended abruptly, and the ensuing silence was almost as unnerving as the shouting. During the days that followed, Emily became more withdrawn. She was often seen alone, wandering the resort grounds or sitting by the shoreline, staring out at the horizon. When a housekeeper came to clean their suite, she found Emily sitting on the balcony, her face partially hidden by large sunglasses. The staff member couldn't help but notice a faint bruise on Emily's forearm, barely concealed by the sleeve of her sundress. When asked if everything was okay, Emily offered a polite but hollow reassurance. In her private moments, Emily poured her heart into her journal. It was a habit she had maintained since her teenage years, a way of processing her emotions and finding clarity. The entries from the honeymoon were different, though fragmented and tinged with fear. She wrote about feeling isolated, about how the man she thought she knew seemed to be slipping away, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. One line stood out. "I thought this would be the happiest time of my life. Why do I feel so alone?" Mark's behavior grew increasingly erratic. His temper flared over minor inconveniences: cold food, a delayed cab, or a simple misunderstanding with resort staff. Emily bore the brunt of his frustration. Her attempts to diffuse the tension often met with icy silence or sharp retorts. The few times they appeared together, their interaction seemed strained, the warmth between them replaced by something colder and more transactional. The resort staff began to take notice. One bartender confided to a colleague that Mark's eyes seemed to burn with an intensity that was unsettling. Meanwhile, a lifeguard observed Emily standing ankle-deep in the ocean one evening, her arms wrapped around herself as though trying to hold herself together. As the days passed, the sense of unease surrounding the couple grew. Emily's fear was palpable, though she kept it hidden beneath a facade of normalcy. What no one could have anticipated was how quickly things would escalate, and how the paradise that had once held so much promise would become the setting for an unthinkable tragedy. The morning began like any other in the tropical paradise of Maui. The sun rose over the ocean, casting golden light across the resort, and the air was filled with the sound of waves lapping against the shore. Guests wandered to the breakfast buffet, their laughter and chatter blending into the serene ambience. But in one of the luxury suites, a chilling discovery shattered the tranquility. When the housekeeper knocked on the door of Mark and Emily Wheeler's room for her scheduled cleaning, there was no answer. Assuming the couple had left early for an excursion, she unlocked the door and entered. The suite was eerily silent, the heavy curtains drawn, creating an unnatural darkness. As she moved further inside, a sense of unease settled over her. The air felt heavy, the stillness oppressive. When she reached the bedroom, she froze. Lying on the cold marble floor was Emily's lifeless body. Her face was bruised and swollen, her head resting in a pool of blood that trailed from the direction of the bathroom. The housekeeper's scream echoed through the hallways, drawing the attention of nearby guests and staff. Resort security arrived quickly, sealing off the area and contacting the local authorities. Detectives Miller and Harlow, seasoned investigators from the Maui Police Department, were assigned to the case. They arrived to find the scene both brutal and perplexing. The room showed clear signs of a violent struggle. Furniture was overturned, and decorative items lay shattered on the floor. A blood-stained lamp was found beside Emily's body, its base cracked, likely the weapon used in the attack. What stood out immediately was Mark's absence. His belongings were still in the room, but there was no sign of him. Surveillance footage from the resort revealed that Mark had left the property in the early hours of the morning, carrying a duffel bag. He appeared calm as he exited through a side door, bypassing the main lobby entirely. The investigation intensified as detectives worked to piece together the events leading to Emily's death. Witnesses at the resort provided fragmented accounts of the couple's behavior in the days prior. Several guests mentioned hearing raised voices from their suite, while others noted Emily's subdued demeanor and Mark's erratic behavior. Emily's body was transported to the coroner's office for an autopsy, which revealed the extent of the violence she had endured. Multiple blunt force trauma injuries were evident, consistent with a prolonged and frenzied attack. The findings left little doubt that her death was a result of homicide. As news of the murder spread, the case quickly garnered national attention. Headlines labeled it the Honeymoon Horror, and the public was captivated by the story of a seemingly perfect couple whose dream vacation had ended in such a gruesome manner. While detectives scoured the island for clues about Mark's whereabouts, Emily's family was contacted and informed of the tragedy. Their grief was immeasurable, their disbelief evident in every tear-filled statement they gave. The search for Mark became a race against time. Authorities were determined to apprehend him, but with every passing hour, the possibility of him evading capture loomed larger. What had begun as a love story in paradise had turned into a nightmare, and the full truth of what happened in that room was still waiting to be uncovered. The manhunt for Mark Wheeler was launched with an urgency that reflected the brutality of the crime. Local police, working in tandem with the FBI, focused on the surveillance footage showing Mark leaving the resort in the early hours of the morning. His calm demeanor and the duffel bag he carried suggested careful planning. The investigators' first step was to track his movements after he left the hotel. Initial leads came from witnesses at a nearby marina. Several boat owners recalled seeing a man matching Mark's description hiring a small motorboat before dawn. He paid in cash, using a fake name, and set off toward the horizon without offering any details about his destination. This revelation prompted a search of the surrounding islands, many of which were uninhabited and difficult to access. Helicopters scanned the waters from above while police boats combed the coastline. The local community, horrified by the news of Emily's murder, rallied to support the search. Flyers with Mark's photo were distributed, and the public was urged to report any sightings. Tips began to trickle in, but many led to dead ends, adding frustration to the already intense investigation. As the hours stretched into days, authorities uncovered more details about Mark's actions leading up to the crime. Financial records showed that he had withdrawn a large sum of cash just days before the honeymoon. He had also made inquiries about private transportation on the island, suggesting a premeditated escape plan. These discoveries painted a chilling picture of a man who had anticipated the worst-case scenario and prepared for it. In the midst of the search, the media frenzy surrounding the case intensified. News outlets across the country broadcast Mark's photo, labeling him a cold-blooded killer and speculating about his motives. The public was captivated by the tragic story of a young woman whose dream honeymoon ended in horror. Social media erupted with theories and outrage, with many questioning how such violence could occur in paradise. The breakthrough came on the third day of the search. An anonymous tip led investigators to a remote cabin on one of the smaller islands, accessible only by boat. The cabin's owner reported renting it out to a man who fit Mark's description, though the guest had provided a false name. The owner became suspicious after hearing about the case and noticing that the man had brought an unusually large amount of supplies for a short stay. A tactical team was dispatched to the island. As they approached the cabin, they spotted Mark through a window, pacing nervously and glancing out at the shoreline. When officers surrounded the property, Mark attempted to flee into the dense foliage behind the cabin. The pursuit was brief. Mark was tackled and subdued, his escape thwarted just as it had begun. When he was brought back to the mainland in handcuffs, Mark's face showed no emotion. He refused to answer questions, his silence adding to the mystery of his actions. The authorities had captured their prime suspect, but many questions remained unanswered. What had driven him to such violence? And why had he gone to such lengths to escape if he believed he could hide forever? The hunt was over, but the unraveling of the truth had only just begun. The courtroom was filled with a quiet tension as Mark Wheeler stood before a judge, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. His trial had begun, and the public was riveted by the details of Emily's brutal murder. For months, the nation had been gripped by the story of the Newlywed wife beaten to death on her honeymoon. The mystery of why Mark had so violently turned against his wife was about to be revealed, and no one could predict what the outcome would be. The prosecution presented its case methodically, laying out the facts with precision. Detective Miller took the stand, recounting the search for Mark after Emily's body was discovered. He described the surveillance footage, the boat rental, and the trail that led them to the remote cabin where Mark had been hiding. The evidence was damning, but it was the autopsy report that truly shook the courtroom. The coroner described the severity of Emily's injuries: blunt force trauma to the head and multiple fractures, consistent with a violent, prolonged assault. As the evidence mounted, the picture of Mark as a loving husband began to crumble. The prosecution presented Emily's journal entries, which revealed the increasing tension in their relationship. The entries were heart-wrenching, showing a woman who was frightened and confused, unsure of how to confront the emotional turmoil she felt. One entry in particular stood out: "I'm scared of him. I don't know who he is anymore." The defense, however, argued that the murder was a crime of passion, a result of a heated argument gone wrong. They painted Mark as a man who had been pushed to his limits by Emily's perceived coldness and her attempts to distance herself. They claimed that Mark had been blindsided by Emily's sudden rejection of him during their honeymoon, and that in a fit of rage he lost control. But this explanation did little to sway the jury. The evidence of premeditation, the cash withdrawal, the escape plan, and the brutality of the crime suggested that Mark's actions were deliberate, not impulsive. As the trial progressed, more of Mark's past came to light. Witnesses testified about his controlling behavior toward Emily before the wedding. He had monitored her every move, dictating who she could talk to and what she could wear. Friends described him as charming on the surface but deeply possessive underneath. Several women from Mark's past came forward, describing similar patterns of emotional manipulation and jealousy. Despite the defense's attempts to downplay the severity of his actions, it became clear that Mark was a man driven by a need for control, a man who had never fully accepted Emily as an independent individual. The final nail in the coffin was the revelation of a chilling detail: a voice message left by Mark on Emily's phone just hours before her death, pleading with her to stay with him, to forgive him for his outbursts. The desperation in his tone was undeniable, but it only confirmed that his anger had been building for weeks. When the jury finally deliberated, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. After just 3 days, they returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Mark Wheeler was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emily's family, though devastated, found some measure of closure. Her parents, especially, expressed their grief over losing their daughter to such a senseless act of violence. They spoke of Emily's kindness, her dreams of becoming a mother, and how much she had been looking forward to a future filled with love and adventure. In the years that followed, Mark's name faded from public memory, but Emily's story endured. Her death became a symbol of the dangers hidden beneath seemingly perfect relationships, of the need to recognize red flags and seek help before it's too late. Her family, forever scarred by the loss, channeled their pain into advocacy for victims of domestic violence, ensuring that Emily's life and death would not be in vain.